Welcome and thank you for sharing your time with us today to hear our story. I'm David Kaufman, Director of Enterprise Infrastructure for Meredith Corporation, the largest media company in America. Though you may not have heard of us, with 180 million people reading our magazines, 135 unique visitors to our digital properties every month, and a local media reach of into 11% of the American market, chances are you're one of our customers. My responsibilities at Meredith include the on-premise and colo data centers, physical and virtual servers, storage area networks, upwards of 3 petabytes of file and block storage, and of course, data protection. Though Meredith was founded in 1902, I did not join them until the year 2000. I was hired as the only Unix administrator. Our infrastructure at that time consisted of about 100 servers, a mix of Sun Solaris, HPUX, and Novell NetWare. Distributed primarily at our Des Moines and New York City offices, but also in each of our 22 remote offices and TV stations. We protected our data by dumping the local tape drives and relied on anyone we could persuade at the remote offices to take the tapes off site when they remembered to. Just think how frustrating that was and nerve-wracking. We didn't used to get a lot of sleep in those days. I've seen a world of changes during my tenure at Meredith. Our company has more than tripled in size and complexity during my tenure. Sorry, I said that twice. I've witnessed the rise of virtualization, converged and eventually hyper-converged infrastructure, and now cloud. Through the years, we've done our best to embrace emerging and disruptive technologies so that our talented creatives can continue to deliver the content you as customers love so well. Our strategy nowadays is one of cloud first. In the case of protecting on-premise data, backing up to the cloud would seem to present a challenge. Happily, though, in Meredith's case, Rubrik has overcome this challenge with a clever and innovative hybrid approach. Embracing Rubrik for our data protection strategy has proven to be a very successful decision. We sleep well at night, now knowing that our data is safe and protected by Rubrik and Amazon S3. So once again, I'm David Kaufman. Thank you for your time.
Hey there. So I'm Jordan Peterson. I work for that guy. So I've got a couple of questions from you just to start out. How many of you guys here are here because you want to hear more about the AWS migration? Like that's your big reason that brought you here? Okay. How many of you are data backup admins and like the Rubrik thing is really kind of what brought you here? Okay. How many of you are here because, you know, you got to be somewhere? Nothing? You guys don't like hands at all. Like, is there like a different one? Is it the media? Are you guys media guys? There we go. Okay. I found my hands. Okay. So I'm going to talk to us a little bit today about how Meredith moved into AWS. Specifically, since you guys are media folks, I'll try to focus in a bit regarding the web side of it, because that's really where our media lives. So to start off with, let's take a picture of what Meredith looked like before AWS. And it was something like this. And I know that slide ain't great, but that's kind of the infrastructure we all lived in. This slide where it's just like all these different servers and services on-prem is what this is kind of showing with a little bit of stuff out in the cloud. And what that meant to us was a lot of problems where we had tons of admins that are all responsible for babysitting like just single services. Like they all have that one service that like, oh, that's that one guy. Like if you have that problem, you go to that guy. And so I think that's the thing we all struggle with. And one of the things that moving to the cloud did for us is help us overcome that. So just as like you can't really tell what's going on the side, that's because it's a mess. So kind of keep that in mind as we kind of work through this, and I'll talk a little bit about how we got out of this mess and into a cloud infrastructure where we were able to deliver content without focusing on individual servers and start focusing on services and the content you guys want to see delivered. So to start off with why we chose AWS, the big thing we started with was PCI compliance. I'm not sure how many of you guys here are working with storefronts or any sort of web sales, but for us that was a big one, and it's difficult to do on-prem. With PCI compliance on-prem, we struggle with the fact that you have to do a lot of data center stuff on top of the actual hardware OS application, and when it comes down to it, like we didn't want to worry about that stuff. So what we were able to do is leverage AWS's shared responsibility model. If you guys haven't heard of that, I really recommend looking it up on their site. They go into great detail on like, this is the stuff we will make sure is PCI compliant. You guys don't have to worry about it. You worry about this stuff, which is the stuff as admins, we cared about, and as developers, people care about. The other thing we needed was global infrastructure on demand, and I think this is going to be the one that clicks with a lot of you guys. When it comes to delivering media and where you deliver that media to, it really helps to have that media close to the end user, close to the people that are going to, consume that content. And so AWS was one of the great things they had is they had these sites that were already built, these data centers, these regions that are already built for us, so you don't have to go in and build all those yourself. So one of the things with Meredith is we had broadcast stations, we have offices that do photo shoots, we have publishing offices, we had all these offices, and all of these people needed access to the same media across all these offices. And then somehow, after we get it out of all those offices, we've got to get it to the end user. And so you're constantly moving files around and doing all sorts of worrying about where it is, whether or not it made it to its destination, that kind of stuff. That AWS regions really solve those problems. The other thing, and the last kind of point on this slide, is the click-and-go applications. What that really meant for us is we use a lot of vendors, and we have these appliances that we're running on-prem, and where these services we're running on-prem. Now, how do we go about moving those on-prem services up to the cloud without rebuilding them from scratch all by ourselves? Nobody wants to do that, and so having that AWS marketplace available to us where we could say, hey, we're running this on-prem, we want to run it on the cloud too, you guys already have an AMI or an image in that marketplace that we can click, was another huge benefit for us. And we'll talk a little bit more what that looks like as we go. So, moving to this hybrid world. When it started, we started as our web and digital media. Like, that was the big things that we were like, hey, how do we get these digital media and these digital assets out into the web? Because we needed to be able to scale. And so looking at that cloud-first approach really helped that. Because when you guys are dealing with on-prem, you're not thinking the same way you would think when you're thinking in the cloud. When it comes to on-prem, everything is very structured and standardized, and like what you buy and what gets shipped to your site is what's stuck at that site. And so if you need to upgrade or you need to move along, or if you're not getting enough storage, that's a huge delay. So how do we change our way of thinking, being like, we have to pre-plan everything and move on to a world where we can plan as we need it? And so we've designed a cloud-first approach. That's anything that we build at Meredith, anything we do at Meredith, we start with, does this make sense on AWS first? And if it doesn't make AWS sense, is it a hybrid solution or is it a completely on-prem solution? So that started with the web environments. And so what that looks like with a web environment comes down to you have your web front ends that we've all experienced. They're Java applications, they're Tomcat applications, they're Node.js applications. And the old way of doing things for us was you had servers. And every single server was responsible for a singular application, but that also meant you were responsible for the operating system, you were responsible for the application, all of the containers, all the services, all the security, all of that was kind of wrapped into it. And it took up so much of our admin's time, so just babysitting the underlying infrastructure, that we weren't able to push out content or push out media as fast as we want to. So how do we make that faster? The approach we took was start with our web environment. That's the thing that needs to scale the most and needs to scale the fastest, especially in a world where a lot of our media and a lot of our assets are used only during certain times of the year. So we're a very seasonal company. We do have year-round content, but a lot of that content is like Thanksgiving's coming up. People want all their Thanksgiving recipes, all of their images, all that thing. Christmas decorations. Like, so these are you have these ebbs and flows, so you don't want to have to worry about scaling and dealing with those migrations like at these peak hours. Like, how do we build for this world where we're not stuck, with what we've already bought? And so the next thing is the centralizing digital assets. I touched on it a little bit earlier, but the big thing with centralizing digital assets for us is we have offices all over the globe. And what happens if I have a photographer in New York who has to send something to an editor in LA, and then some publisher in Birmingham needs to take care of this now? I've got to worry about getting all of that stuff everywhere. And you're creating all these different local copies. And that's where another huge thing with AWS, you get these S3 object stores, you get a storage front end, and you put that there. And it doesn't matter what offices we spin up or what sites we go to, you pull those assets from that same S3 bucket at every site. And so you don't get this mesh network of all these remote offices and data centers, and they're all trying to talk to each other in this strange web of, well, did my file get where it said it should? So that's where things like the S3 buckets was a huge one for us. The storage gateway was a huge one for us. So what that looks like for Meredith, all of our photographers, they run through a media asset management system. And so that media asset management system is going to take all that, push it up to the cloud, and that means anybody with a client, wherever they are in the world, they could be working out of Starbucks, can pull down those assets and work on them locally. And so that was a big move into the hybrid world for us. We were no longer restricted to you have to be on site to access these files because these files are on site. These files are in the cloud. They're available everywhere. And that was a huge part of our media consumption, was getting these files from photographers to editors to publishers, wherever they needed to be. So we had to kind of start moving in that direction. And the place we really struggled with starting moving into that direction is how do we do it quickly? How do we deal with the capacity problems? And how do we kind of worry about like configuring everything by hand? Because that's a big thing that came into it. Like I've been saying, like you don't want your admins focused on dealing with the same thing every single day, maintaining all this underlying infrastructure. And so there's things like Elastic Beanstalk was a big one for us. S3 buckets were another big one for us. But that's kind of where we talk about what our infrastructure used to be like compared to what it was. So the old Meredith infrastructure was very heavily built for peak capacity. And what that meant was when we have these seasonal timeframes where we had to deal with delivering this content during our peak business hours, which was Thanksgiving, Christmas, holidays, you had to pay for that year round. You weren't getting away from that. You had to be available for 100% capacity 100% of the time, even if most of the time you weren't utilizing that capacity. And that also meant running those servers 24/7, because you never know when that peak's going to be. So you're just wasting so much money building for something you don't need, and then you have to configure it all by hand. So you've got to build all this stuff. It's got to be available 24/7. You've got to have it completely built by yourself from scratch, and that's kind of this world we were stuck in, and it would take so much time to build it. And so what we kind of wanted to move to was being able to scale our infrastructure on demand. And that was huge. With Elastic Auto Scaling Groups and Elastic Beanstalk, we were really able to push our web content out as we needed it, when we needed it. It was no longer, we've built all these servers, planning ahead of time, knowing that we're going to need it, 100% capacity 6 months from now. We were able to plan ahead, but it didn't make sense all the time. Because what if this peak season wasn't as busy as last peak season? Those kind of things became problems. And the other thing was scheduling instances. I'm sure a lot of you work with developers. And the thing about developers is they don't always develop. They're not on 24/7. They're not working 24/7. But these developer instances, these test instances, these staging environments, they're running 24/7. And that starts to add up constantly. And so one of the things that AWS has allowed us to do is we take those non-production instances and we're able to just schedule them for when we need them. So you can get those assets and you can get that media and you can get those endpoints when we need them. Do we need to scale up? That's doable. And then so the next thing we have to worry about is if we're building these massive environments and we're constantly deploying this infrastructure that's handling all of this, you have to be able to repeat the process. You have to be able to do it over and over again. And especially as we acquire companies, as we grow, as we start pushing out more websites, how do you make sure that website A and website B aren't being completely different configurations that have to be managed by the same admin? Or what happens when that guy leaves the company and you have to bring in another admin and he has to learn 4 different ways of configuring something? So we really wanted to standardize in a repeatable format of how do we deploy these things, how do we grow in the environment? And what that looked like was CloudFormation. So I'm sure everybody here is familiar with CloudFormation. It allowed us to deploy these stacks that we can just repeat over and over again. So every time we get a new brand, anytime we get a new company, anytime we need to push into the cloud again, we can redeploy this infrastructure as we need it. And it builds quickly. Like with CloudFormation, once you've done the work of building the templates, you just push it out and you're done. Like you click the button, it pushes it out, you can walk away. You're not spent sitting and watching it for days at a time like we were with Onprem. So we start this migration. So we start moving into this world where we're working with all of these cloud assets. We're moving more and more of our things into the cloud. And then it started with the web and it started with this media. But then we moved into other regions and other domains. And what I mean by that is like things like BI are shipping appliances. How a magazine gets to your door from the day you purchase it from our web front end to the day it ends up in FedEx or UPS, wherever it goes, all of those have a completely different need when it comes to being in the cloud. They're not built the same way. They're not doing the same things. But you don't want to have to maintain all these different configurations. So we started to realize that as we built more and more in the cloud, we needed to standardize on best practices. And so that's where we really leveraged the AWS's, they have a platform that allows you to really focus on a well-developed solution. And so we were able to repeat these well-developed solutions. And it's the same thing. Once you rinse, you get a new business domain, you have new challenges, you got to do it all over again. So how do we do that over and over again and scale out those domain agnostic best practices? What we found for us really worked is AWS has a great solution with their config management tools and their system management tools that allow us to maintain an entire fleet no matter how many accounts we grow to over and over again. So what that means for us today, from an infrastructure point of view, which is where I live, is speed. We get new instances, new pipelines, new direct connects quickly and efficiently, and the capacity. We're no longer running at 100%. We're running at exactly what we need when we need it, and we'll burst into the cloud when we need more. And then reusability, being able to take these best practices we've learned and then just repeat them over and over and over again, all without having to rethink how we do things, has been extremely convenient. So that's where our world in AWS comes in. But then the big thing for us also is once we get all that stuff into the cloud, how do we keep it protected? And so Mike Kingtoft's going to come on here, and he's going to be able to talk about Rubrik and how we use Rubrik to protect all those things that we've got up in the cloud as well as on-prem.
Thank you, Jordan. So let me ask you again the question, how many backup admins do we have here today? Couple? Good. I felt like I just snuck in the side door here at AWS. I wasn't quite sure I fit, but I'm glad we got a couple of backup admins. So my name's Mike Kingtoft. I'm a member of the enterprise infrastructure team at Meredith Corporation. I've been with the company for more than 19 years. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how I became involved with data protection. When I first joined Meredith, we had 3 or 4 distinct backup solutions in place. They knew they needed to change that, so they had a project in the works. There was an engineer that was leading the team to go down to one backup solution. We had data sitting in the data center. We had resources scheduled to come in and help us to implement this. Our engineer decided this is a good time to leave the company. So that left us with a little bit of a dilemma. Who was going to take this project? Who was going to administer backups going forward? So the guys in charge looked around and they said, gee, let's give it to the new guy. So I've been the backup guy ever since. That hasn't been my only responsibility by any means, but I think it's been my most important role. We've recently added a data protection administrator to manage day-to-day operations so that I can take on a little bit more of a management role, but I still do a lot of backups. And I know that some folks might see data protection as boring. I think that's a little misguided. I'm here to tell you, there's nothing more exciting than trying to recover a critical business asset, whether it's a single file or a server, when you're under pressure. Our business depends upon us. It's to protect them from mistakes, to protect them from disasters. And when we can do that, we get to be a hero. Over the last 2 years, we've changed how we protect our data. I'd like to talk about some of the challenges that we faced and how we came to realize that we needed to go in a completely different direction. So I hope I'm not going to bore anybody, but this is a simplified picture of what a backup environment looked like in our legacy data protection system. This is what we looked like in the year 2000. You installed client software back on servers. That software streamed the data to backup servers. The backup servers wrote the data to tape. The backup servers kept a catalog of what we wrote, when we wrote it, where we wrote it on the tapes, where the tapes physically resided, and how long we were going to retain that data. Pretty simple picture. Over the years, there were bolt-ons. We gained virtual tape libraries, faster, better tape drives, deduplication appliances, replication, all of those things. But they were add-ons. They added complexity. They added licensing cost, maintenance, and they just added to the load that we had to bear to do our data protection. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. So with am I on the right slide? Did I reset it? Help me out here, Ken.
Sorry, folks.
Sorry. Told you I was nervous. Yeah, it's just advanced technology. Okay. So with the advent of virtualization, cloud computing, and of course the rapid growth of how much data we have to store, our legacy backup solution just wasn't working too well for us. Here's some of the problems that we faced. In the area of complexity and future-proofing, we had multiple backup servers, network devices, storage devices, SAN devices. All of these things had to work seamlessly together, and that wasn't always the case. So for example, we had a time where we installed these devices called fiber to SCSI bridges, and I don't know if anybody's old enough to know what those are, but they stood between the backup servers and the tape drives, and they allowed the SCSI tape drives to be portable. A backup server could reserve it, write his data to it. He's done with his backup jobs, he can let it go. Another backup server could come take over. It allows us to have fewer tape drives and less licensing because those were really expensive. It allowed a feature called shared storage option. So great idea. At first, it was terrible for us. We had, every night, we had tape drives being marked down. We had tape drives literally eating tapes, and backups were just in a bad state. It took us a while to figure that out, and eventually we had to get some beta firmware for those fiber to SCSI bridges. But again, for a while, I didn't get a lot of sleep, and Meredith didn't get a lot of backups. That's just one example. We had other incompatibilities too. We also had some challenges due to the number of vendors and manufacturers involved. Some were slow to adopt new technology, and at times they would blame each other whenever there was a problem. We also had quite a bit of hardware that was reaching end of life and would need some pretty costly replacement. We had more challenges around our administration and support. So daily administration was pretty labor intensive. It was taking up a lot of my time. Software upgrades were usually delayed for months because incompatibility between the different products that we were putting together. And when we finally could do those upgrades, it would take us literally weeks because we had to upgrade software on hundreds of servers. So tape handling, monitoring, and problem resolution was a manual process. We were required to send our backup tapes off-site every day, and then for restore, we had to call them back. Periodically, we had to reconcile our licensing and maintenance and support contracts, and the cost of those was just skyrocketing every year. So maintaining and operating all of this was really kind of becoming unmanageable. We knew there had to be a better way. And what about our assets in the cloud? How are we going to protect things in this brave new world? And then Meredith acquired this little company called Time Inc. We went from 2 backup domains in the continental United States to 11 backup domains across the globe. Number of remote offices increased quite a bit, and we were pretty sure that we were still only going to have one backup admin, and that would be me. This really pointed out to us that we needed to find a better way. We needed to simplify how we protect our data. So next slide, let's see if I can do it right this time. There we go. So we set out to find that better way. We looked at several vendors, several data protection solutions, and each of them had their own charm. They had their own selling points. They had their own strengths. They had their own weaknesses. But in the end, we chose Rubrik. It had all of the features, all of the functions that we felt we needed in our organization, and at a cost that was much better than our legacy backup solution. The Rubrik team came in and made a really good business case for us and showed us we could save money. So here's a quick rundown of some of the things that I like, and I hope I don't bore the real backup admins in the room, but we have local storage on the Rubrik cluster for instant recovery. for instant restores. We don't have to call tapes back anymore. For longer term retention, we send it up to Amazon S3, infrequent access. Rubrik calls this cloud out. I call it, thank God I'm out of the tape business. S3 gives us unlimited storage capacity. We still do have the need and the ability to back up physical clients by installing software in them. We also have agents for Oracle databases, and we have agents for Microsoft SQL databases. We can protect NAS shares by mounting them to the Rubrik cluster via NFS or SMB protocols. We can now protect our Amazon EC2 instances the same way we protect our on-prem systems. This makes it easy to manage for kind of a non-cloud savvy backup administrator. At Meredith, this is the coolest thing. At Meredith, we have both VMware and Nutanix virtualization platforms. So you can instantly recover. Do we have any VMware folks in here, by the way? So you can instantly recover a VM by what happens is the VMware cluster, the Rubrik cluster opens an NFS share up to the ESX host. ESX host mounts that BMDK up. It's running in 10 seconds. Then you vMotion it back to the cluster. It's cool. The cool thing is that you can instantly recover that VM to a different VMware cluster or to a different geographical location. So what that's done for us is made those VMs portable. Recently, that's been a lifesaver for us recently because we've been consolidating some offices. So for an example, just last week, we closed down an office in Hong Kong. We had some critical financial VMs that needed to come back to the States. We backed them up to our home office in Des Moines, Iowa, to a Rubrik cluster, shut them down in Hong Kong, started them up in Des Moines, changed the network settings, and our customers were using them in 20 minutes. It was really cool. That's been sort of the silver bullet for us. Another feature that I do like is one that allows us to work towards self-service. We can create things called organizations. You can allow groups like our Oracle database administrators to log into the Rubrik cluster. They can see their servers, they can see their databases, they can see their SLAs, their backup policies. They can manage their own backups. They can do their own restores, they can live mount databases, they can do their own reporting, they can do their own work. They love that function. We did the same thing for Microsoft SQL admins. We've also opened that up to a couple of power user groups in our organization, allowing them to log into the cluster, do their own restores, monitor their own backups. And I really like this feature. It gets a little work off of my plate, and it allows them to be empowered. Each Rubrik cluster has a fairly simple web-based interface for management, reporting, alerting. Rubrik's got a service called Polaris that it's a web interface again as well, but it pulls each Rubrik cluster, aggregates information, so we can get some global reporting out of it. And it also allows us to manage our EC2 instances on that interface, on that platform. So here's something that's really helped us. Remember when I mentioned that upgrading our software would be weeks? With Rubrik Node software upgrades, we open a support ticket. We open a channel so that support can come in and do the upgrades, and that's it, we're done. They let us know when it's done. That saves us weeks every upgrade cycle. Upgrading hardware is pretty painless. They bring in a new node, plug it into the cluster, join it to the cluster, evacuate an old node, and voila, we're upgrading our hardware. It's that simple. All of this really allows us to worry more about our data and less about our data protection solutions. Okay, one more. So this slide shows kind of a simplified picture of our, it's a simple picture anyway, but it's a simplified picture of our data protection environment with Rubrik at Meredith. We've got each data center has an appropriately sized Rubrik cluster. They each can back up remote offices. They have that data locally. We also send that data up to Amazon S3, and that's the whole picture of on-prem backup. Again, we also manage EC2 snapshot backups as well. Rubrik acts as kind of an orchestrator for that function. Okay, getting close. As I mentioned, we're now starting to use Rubrik to manage protection of our EC2 instances. We like the ability to see all of our data protection in one pane of glass. We've already had the opportunity to demonstrate a full recovery of a production server in AWS, and it went really well. I see this area of data protection growing in importance for us as we move more things up to the cloud. Okay, to summarize, we feel like we've really taken a huge step forward by going to Rubrik. We feel like we just kind of hit the easy button here. We don't have to do near as much work. We simplified and we future-proofed our data protection environment, and we're able to better meet the needs of our business, of our customers. And I, for one, am very happy. I get to sleep at night. I'm happy with our decision to go in this new direction. So thank you for listening, and now I'll pass you back to Ken.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Dave, Jordan, Michael, for sharing about Meredith's story of how they've now running hybrid on-prem and in AWS. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give a brief overview of Rubrik, just to talk about some of the things that Michael shared about of what they liked about Rubrik and how it helped them protect their data assets both on premises and in the cloud. And then hopefully, we'll have some amount of time that will all come up and folks can answer any questions they want. I can't promise it'll all get answered, but we'll do our best. So first place to start is to talk about what Rubrik actually is. So if you look at this picture, this is probably familiar to you, especially if you do any kind of backup work. It's basically a bunch of point solutions that come together to form a backup system. So how many of you, I don't know how many of you have ever worked on cars, but basically this picture is like taking an old jalopy or an old car that you had, and then as it starts to break down or you're trying to soup it up, you start replacing the tires, you start replacing the engine, maybe you change the suspension. But it's basically building on this old car that you're just adding stuff to over time until it becomes this kind of Frankenstein monster. And then at some point you say, I've had enough, I'm just going to buy a new car or lease a new car. So that's what, at Rubrik, we felt like that was where the state of legacy backup was. It was basically this very old system that the vendors started trying to build on top of and what solutions to add to. And over time, they had to kind of cobble it together. So what we decided was, what if we kind of took a brand new look at that? And we said, instead of these point solutions that you're trying to tie together, we'll actually start from the ground up and built a converged software platform that can basically do everything that you would need to do, from backups to deduplication to data management and archiving, and shrink that down to a single software platform that you can actually install on just what we call a Rubrik brick, which is 4 nodes in a system. And then we also built that on a scale-out architecture so that you can actually just keep adding nodes. And unlike a lot of other systems, when you add a Rubrik node, you're basically not only adding capacity, but you actually add performance as well. Then obviously, we wanted to make sure that we took advantage of the fact that you have this unlimited data store that Michael and Jordan talked about in Amazon S3. So we also enable customers to replace their tape environment by shipping things off to S3 instead of having to go to a tape library. So like I said, the archiving out to S3 was kind of the first foray of Rubrik into AWS. But we've added other functionality over time. One of them, besides cloud archiving, we also have the ability to say, well, now that I've got my VM image, right, in the cloud, what if I could take that VMDK file and then convert it to an AMI or AMI, and now I can launch EC2 instances of it, so that you can actually have a replica, essentially, of your on-premises environment, but running in the cloud and only as you need to. So we have customers looking at doing that for test dev and for recovery of instances. I'm actually going to skip Cloud Edition and talk about Cloud Native Protection. This is the idea of, so now that I've got these instances running, maybe, again, either because they've been converted from on-prem or because I'm launching a brand new environment, how do I protect that data, right? Because what AWS is really good at is giving you these primitives to build stuff, but ultimately fully protecting that data is the customer's responsibility, right? AWS will make sure that try to keep the services up as running as possible, but they're not at fault if you just lose data in some way. So we wanted to make sure that our customers had the ability to use some of our products to be able to do that protection. So quickly, Michael talked about the idea of archiving off to S3 instead of tape. So that's our cloud out functionality. You can see here, basically, we can take stuff that are running on premises and then ship them off to either Amazon S3 or Glacier. And customers who do that find that there's a few benefits. One is that we actually do a lot of data efficiencies. So instead of just setting up all the kind of the full backups every time, we actually dedupe and compress the data on-prem before sending it to S3. So you're kind of minimizing the amount of bandwidth you have to spend, and also the amount of storage you have to incur in S3. And then we only send incremental backups. So we basically take a incremental forever approach in terms of backing up on-premises data. So we'll send that first full backup to S3, and then every backup after that are incrementals. And then we're doing things in the background over time, so to consolidate some of that, so that you're not taking a chain of 100 snapshots and having to restore all that to get a full VM back. So there are things we're doing on cloud in AWS to handle that. Also, we actually index every snapshot. So we don't actually run a catalog. We actually keep the metadata for the backups with the backup itself. And the cool thing about that, what it allows us to do is basically, instead of having to search through the catalog, you can actually just search for a file name, and we'll quickly find every instance of that file across all our backups, and you can choose which file to back up to restore from. And finally, because we're because we know what file you are trying to restore, and what blocks underneath that, we'll only send the blocks back from S3 when you need to restore on premises. So instead of having to restore an entire file system or an entire image, it's only that file. So obviously that, again, minimizes the egress costs of getting stuff out of S3 and enables you to spend that money on something else. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but Rubrik Cloud On is that functionality you talked about, where we can take a VMDK, convert that to an Amazon machine image, and then enable you to launch that Amazon machine image. And it'll be an exact replica of what you're running on premises. And then the thing I'll spend a little more time talking about is Amazon EC2 protection. So you see, we have, besides the on-premises software appliance, which we call the cloud data management software, we also run a Rubrik as a SaaS platform called Polaris. So it's basically a software instance running in the cloud. There's sort of no infrastructure for you to manage. That's all being managed by Rubrik. And then we basically create an encrypted tunnel into your AWS environment. And we use cross-account roles, so you're not giving us full admin access to your AWS account. You're only giving us the access that you want and that we would need to basically manage your snapshots and your AMIs. And what we're doing, the reason customers tend to choose that is basically we can automate a lot of data protection. So again, we ran into a lot of customers who were doing a lot of scripting of their backups in AWS, trying to get them to do snapshots on a daily or every few hour basis. And then over time, AWS has added some new tools to let you do some of those scheduling of snapshots, but those tend to be, it's still in kind of an infancy stage. So there are things, more complex things that often backup admins want to be able to do. So we basically put our policy engine that you're using on premises and apply that to an EBS snapshot. So You can set policies like backing up every 4 hours and then and every day only keeping the last snapshot, and then every month only keeping the last snapshot of that month. So you can have your typical kind of son, father, grandfather rotation. We also manage the expiration of snapshots. So I've talked to customers who have hundreds of snapshots that they did not even know they had because they weren't able to keep control of it. So with Rubrik, basically customers have the ability to say, after 30 days, just delete the snapshot. We don't need it anymore. And also we can do, mention the fact that you can do file level recovery. So today, if you are using, using the AWS APIs, if you want to recover a single file from EBS snapshot, what you basically have to do is to take the snapshot, first you got to find the snapshot that you want, and basically you launch a volume from that, then you mount the volume, and then you hunt through the file system, look for the file. If it's the right one, you bring it back. If it's the wrong one, you delete the volume, go to the next snapshot, repeat the process. What we do is basically, because we are indexing every file and letting you choose the exact file that you want to restore, you don't have to do that. We'll actually handle all the background work of getting that file and pulling it out and giving you access to it. And then one of the things that some of our customers have is S3 is a regional resource. But the EBS, the snapshots, the AMIs themselves tend to be associated with a particular region. So some customers say, well, I want to be able to do cross-region. I want to make sure that if I'm taking a backup of my EBS snapshots in Virginia, I want to make sure that it goes to Ohio or goes to West Coast. Right now, that's a manual process or a scripted process you have to do. But with Rubrik, we'll actually be able to control that and do the replication cross regions automatically for you. And then something that Michael talked about was this idea that you can, since it's one software platform that's doing the management of your backups, you can use the same basically the same process and policies to apply it to your AWS environment that you're applying today to your on-premises environment. All right, so I'm going to let's do a little bit of details about how the EC2 backups work. So right now, if you're you can choose to back up as either an EC2 instance level or you can back up an EBS level. So if you're doing EBS backup, basically you're basically invoking a create snapshot API that basically just does an instant snapshot and then sends that to S3. The creating a image back in EC2 instance is a little more complicated. And here we basically invoke the create image API, and what that does is, besides doing an EBS snapshot, it will actually go ahead and create an Amazon machine image that has all the metadata that you need to make sure that you are storing a full copy of that instance. And that's all again gets stored in S3, and then we'll replicate that if you want to whatever region you want this to be replicated to. And then I show this chart because today this is if you were going to do the restore of a snapshot yourself or of an instance or a snapshot, this is what you would have to do. Basically walk through this manual process of being able to create the volumes, stop the instance, detach the old one, attach the new one, and so forth. So in this case, in Rubrik, it's basically a couple of clicks or an API, a couple of commands, and we'll actually walk through that process of calling the correct APIs to walk through this entire process for you. So we're kind of orchestrating things, and it basically gives you faster recovery time and kind of eliminates the possibility of error on your part. Okay. So I'm going to have the guys come up in case you guys all have any questions. Before I do that, though, I want to let you know we do have the Meredith story summarized. I think it's a data sheet that you can download from our website. If you want to learn about more about how Rubrik is working with AWS and is part of that ecosystem, you can go to our website as well. And finally, we have a booth, I think it's 3416, over at the Expo Hall at the Venetian. So we have some stations set up where folks can give you a demo so you can see exactly how these things work. and to see if that's something you would be interested in exploring further. So, thank you. Could I ask you guys to come up and does anyone have any questions about anything that we've talked about from, again, Rubrik or from how Meredith made their move from on-prem only to AWS?
Any feedback on when the native protection in AWS becomes more than just like a snapshot manager and becomes more of a kind of what you're accustomed to when you have on-prem, meaning, the challenge we have today if you go the native snapshot route is maintaining those for a long period of time can become costly. So having some way to take the data that exists inside of those snapshots, moving that into S3, and then allowing at some point Rubrik to reconstruct what the snapshot once was.
Are you talking about on-premises or in AWS?
Natively in AWS. So if we're trying to get away from the on-prem world,
Yeah.
strictly in AWS, just maintaining those snapshots long-term isn't a good philosophy for us just based on the cost of it.
Yeah, so I think that's some of the things we're doing with the policy engine, where we're basically giving you the ability to specify how long you want to keep the snapshot for, and it will automatically delete them, expire them when you don't need them anymore. Is there a reason why you have to keep so many snapshots? Is it because,
It's just more due to a lack of a retention policy.
Okay, yeah.
And just issues with legal and compliance and getting them to
Okay.
commit to something that's more reasonable
Okay.
than keep it forever.
Yeah, so I think the fact that we have that policy kind of, once you have it in place, we'll automate all that process of knowing, of keeping snapshots and then deleting them when you don't need them anymore. One of the things to keep in mind is the way EBS snapshots work is you can delete the old snapshots, the data will carry over, right, from the deleted snapshots over to the snapshots you've kept. So you're not, you could be losing some point in time, but you don't have to worry about losing data that you need. So you just need to, it's one of those we'll probably have to work with you to figure out what the right policy is, and then but then once you have that policy, you can enforce it using Rubrik. So
there's no idea of like putting a Rubrik cluster in AWS and bringing more of the functionality that you might have gotten on-prem.
like
To archive it to S3 or Glacier.
Actually, like standing up a cluster, like a Rubrik. Like, can you build Rubrik nodes inside of AWS?
Actually, we can do that today. I think the main thing is we've had the policy of we want to integrate as much possible with the cloud provider, or in the case of VM, with VMware's APIs, rather than kind of built our own from scratch. So this is basically the way that AWS's APIs work. So we're basically focused on orchestrating that as best as we can. So I think there may be things we're looking at, but nothing that I could say is definitely on the roadmap.
The biggest thing for us that we lose is if I want to search for a file over the entirety of how long that instance is lived in AWS, you can't do that.
So we can. So again, we index every file in the EBS snapshots.
Oh, you do that?
Yes.
All right, sorry, I missed that.
Yeah. So you can actually go to our console and you can say search for a file, and we'll tell you all the EBS snapshots where a copy of that file exists, and then the idea is you can pull that file, and in the background, we'll do everything necessary to pull that file out for you.
So you don't even need the full file name. You can search on a string. And
Doing the native protection. You can
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can also use the archive policies out there as well, right, for the EC2 snapshots? Archive them to S3 using workloads?
In terms of, so again, by default, all EBS snapshots get sent to S3 anyway. So it's not, so it's in S3 by default. So, any questions? Yeah.
You mentioned a few times about EBS. Does it also support EFS backups?
Not today. I'm not even sure Amazon really supports EFS backups today. We're looking to do more backups of AWS resources, so that's stuff we're talking with them about. It's just a hard problem because if you have, in theory, you could mount it to an instance and then you can back it up that way. You just need probably like a 100-year backup window. I'm just kidding. It's just too slow a process. So we're going to have to work with AWS to figure out a better way to do that. So.
Yeah, and the second question I had was around Cloud On.
Yeah.
We're looking at Cloud On.
Yep.
And is there any additional intelligence? Because whenever you're trying to reinstantiate a VM
Yep.
or a VMDK from on-premise to the cloud, obviously it's not just a set of VMs. It's also load balancers, other
Yep.
infrastructure components that you might have to replace with an Amazon service,
Yep.
for example.
Yeah.
So is there any intelligence, for example, if you were putting three VMs that were behind a load balancer, that it would then take it, put it into the EOB,
Yeah.
to the EOB as it's being instantiated?
Yeah. So it sounds like you would like a blueprint that you could create that says that everything goes in a group, and when it gets instantiated a group with all the resources around it. Is that what you're talking about? Something like that? Yeah. I was,
We
yeah.
have to build the environment
Yep.
ourselves or not. If
Yep.
we're putting those VMs into that environment, it would be good to have some type of automation.
I totally agree with you. So I would say today that's not there, but stay tuned. So, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Compression was mentioned a couple times.
Mhm.
Is it a general lossless compression, or is there media-specific compression, like image-based or video-based or anything like that?
So when I talk about compression, it's talking about the backup itself, the image that we're backing up on premises. So we're compressing that data.
Oh, just so one big like zip file, but maybe better.
Yeah, I have to check. I don't know the exact way we're doing that. So, anyone else? Sorry, go ahead. In the back.
The VM you brought to one from Hong Kong, is it a small VM?
Good question. I think it was 80 gig. It wasn't huge. We actually did 3 or 4 of them. It took like 5.5 days to get it back to Des Moines for the first shot. But deltas after that were 2 hours.
You don't have bricks in alternate branches.
Correct. In Hong Kong, we did not. We didn't have a Rubrik cluster. So took it 5.5 hours to get back to Des Moines for the first shot, or 5 days, 6 hours rather. After that, it was 2 hours per. So we knew when that office was going to get shut down. We made sure nobody was doing any work on those things, did a final backup, and then brought it up in Des Moines. It was really cool. It's been a lifesaver for us.
Okay. Something I had a question. Yep.
Do you know when app flows will be GA?
Who do you work for? So app flows. The question was when something called app flows, which is something I guess we've talked about with some people. It's I would say is related to some of the questions I've been asked. It's one of those. So it's something that's coming. I can't give you a time frame or a date yet. So trying to get me in trouble. Okay. Any other questions? If not, you guys can willing to stay around. Some people would rather come up and ask questions directly. So I don't think we got 5 minutes or so before we have to vacate the room. So again, thank everyone for joining us, and also anyone who'll be watching this on YouTube later. So appreciate your time.